Welcome everyone to the Electric Africa webinar series, AI Artists and Immersive Media. My name is Ajwa Nkoma, Director of Policy and Research at Electric South, and I'll be your host today. This three-part webinar series is designed to connect our past work on AI and immersive media with current perspective in the field and to set the stage for our upcoming AI and immersive media convening for 2025. For those joining us for the first time, a quick word about Electric South. We're a nonprofit based in South Africa that supports African artists to tell original, underrepresented stories using immersive media like virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, and 360 film. Our work straddles both the arts and technology, and increasingly research and policy because we believe artists must have a seat at the table when decisions about technology are being made. When we say immersive, we're talking about creative practices that use tools like VR, XR, and AR and interactive storytelling. These practices experiment with both form and technology and bring unique perspectives to debates about emerging tech like AI. Today, I am truly delighted to welcome Ingrid Kopp, co-founder and director of labs and partnerships at Electric South, who has been at the forefront of supporting artists across Africa to engage critically and creatively with new technologies. Many of you will know Ingrid's work already. She produces and facilitates the New Dimensions Lab here at Electric South, has been an executive producer on award-winning VR projects, and until the end of 2024, co-chaired the Global Future Council on the Metaverse at the World Economic Forum. Her experience spans Tribeca Film Festival and more, recently Electric South's own journey into research and policy. Beyond her impressive resume, Ingrid has been a mentor and collaborator for countless artists across the continent. She has a rare ability to connect global conversations about emerging technologies with the lived realities and creativity of African practitioners. Our theme today is building ethical, inclusive AI for immersive arts. We'll reflect on Electric South's early AI work, explore what inclusive AI means in practice, and discuss how African artists can shape these conversations at both a creative and policy level. Immersive artists bring a particular perspective to AI because they're not just storytellers, but they're also experimenters with the technologies themselves. They raise questions about ethics, culture, and power that might otherwise be ignored in mainstream AI debates. We'll spend about 35 minutes in conversation and then open the floor to questions for the last 20 minutes. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A box at any point. Ingrid, let's begin at the beginning. Why did Electric South feel the need to start addressing AI in the first place?
Good question, and thank you for such a nice introduction. So I think to go back even beginnings with Electric South, in all of my work pre-Electric South, I've always been interested in new technologies and how they affect the storytelling arts. So this, for me, when AI came along, it was the same kind of questions and curiosity I've brought to kind of all my work, I think. Which is kind of like, what does this technology do and how is it going to affect artists? Both good and bad. What are the opportunities? What are the threats? And I've done that, from the very beginning of my days at in TV, where it was all about like digital cameras, like prosumer cameras coming along and threatening the big, heavy cameras that were being used before, opening up, opportunities for storytelling, but also making engineers very nervous. All the way through the advent of social media like Twitter and how you could tell stories with social media, and then web docs, and then VR came along, and all the way along I've been like, oh, this is interesting. What can this technology do? So with AI, I think as soon as generative AI sort of became so prolific and there were so many new tools, and certainly with the advent of ChatGPT, the launch in 2022, I was really both worried and curious about how that was going to affect the work that we do, and more generally, just how it will affect the arts, and jobs and all these other things that, we worry about. And I thought, okay, I need to learn more about this. And I think one of the things I want to say right at the beginning of this webinar is I am not an expert in AI at all, right? And I'm not claiming that I will tell you about the work that we've been doing through Electric South and the questions that I've been asking, but there are lots of AI experts out there who really kind of know the ins and outs, and that is not me. I'm not a computer scientist. I don't use these tools every day. Well, maybe I do now. But like I am just interested in, as a founder and a director in a nonprofit working with artists in Africa, like what are the questions we need to be asking? Like that's where I come from. And then I guess the other side of it is I've always been interested in like how we drive technology from Africa rather than receiving it, right? And having to just like
Mm,
put up with whatever we get. And so when like all of these AI tools came along, I was like, okay, what's happening in Africa and what are we driving? What are we creating? What are we imagining that isn't sort of being handed to us? So those are the questions that kind of came up. I don't know if I've answered your question though.
yes, you have. Yes, you have. Um, and looking back, when you reflect then on, how this work all came about, including the toolkit and the webinar series at the 2023 New Dimensions Lab, what then stands out to you now about that?
So I think, I mean, it's so funny. I guess one of the things that stands out is how long ago that feels, right? With that, the technologies have moved so fast since then. I mean, it's really, really vertiginous how quickly everything's changed. And I would say, we decided at the 2023 lab, the New Dimensions lab, we decided that we would have a day focus on AI. And we also invited advisors and speakers who were making work with AI. So we had people like Sandra Rodriguez and Brett Gaylor who are going to be in the future webinars of this stream. And then we also had people like Violeta Ayala and Karen Palmer, who are also doing amazing work with AI in their work. But through the practice of using AI in their work, they're also addressing the ethical considerations of what AI does. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And then we had a day where we'd invited these external guests to come and actually sort of sit down with us and think through what it means for African artists that all these new tools are available. How should we be using them? What should we be worried about? And we had people like Chennai Chair, who at the time was with Mozilla. She's now with Masakane. We invited funders. So it was like a really interesting group of people who were thinking about AI or using AI in interesting ways. And out of that, I wrote the toolkit. And again, I felt like such a fraud writing that toolkit because, I was like, why am I, Ingrid Kopp, writing a toolkit on AI? Because, I felt like I'd almost like just discovered like a lot of the ideas in it. But what I thought is like there must be other people who are also thinking about these things and who want to know more. So I'll just like put down a bunch of links. And that's why I called it the toolkit and conversation starter, because I didn't want it to feel like a done deal, right? It was like, these are the things that I've discovered. Who else, would you recommend we read? Or connect with. There are some amazing thinkers in the space, which maybe we can talk a little bit more about in this webinar. Um, and so that basically was what the toolkit was. And it's on our website if anyone wants to download it under the hub section. But yeah, that's kind of how that toolkit came about. I was like, okay, we've had all these amazing conversations at the lab. We had all these amazing presentations from these practitioners. I want to like put as much of that into a toolkit as possible. And the idea was that that would be step one of an ongoing process, which is exactly what's happened because then in 2024, we ran a small convening, and now you are going to be running a bigger convening this year. So it's unfolding, right? The whole thing is unfolding as the tools develop and I guess as the conversation changes.
I think that it was really inspired actually for you to call it a conversation starter as well, because I think it became less intimidating for the audience at the time, which is, for us, the creative community. What do you think has been the impact of the toolkit since, putting it out there in
Yeah.
2023?
It's so interesting that you say like that because a lot of people have said that like that they were feeling really intimidated and they didn't know where to start. And I was always joking, and I know a lot of people have said this, but like I wanted to learn more about AI so that I could know why I was hating it so much. That's how I felt. I was like, I want to be more knowledgeable so I can hate it properly. I don't feel quite the same anymore. I still have a lot of misgivings, by the way. I am not a champion of like, is an AI wonderful? I think that there are a lot of huge problems that we, are. needing to address. And one of them is obviously representation from uh, places like, like the whole continent of Africa. And there is a lot happening, but yeah, I have a lot of problems still. But I think I also saw that there were these amazing opportunities, and that some of the, well, it's one of the things I talk about in the toolkit. For me, it was a real tension between, like, these things can be very harmful, but also we're not represented in them, right?
Mm,
So it was this weird thing of like, we want to be there, but we're also worried about what's actually being created. And I thought that was a really interesting tension to explore. And I still feel like that, by the way. Like, I'm really inspired by what like Lalapa AI and Masakana are doing. And if you look at some of the African participants in the deep learning in Daba, like, it's
mm,
great. Like, there's all these like African languages that are being represented in large language models. I think that's really cool. And I love that now when I do image generation, a lot of local terms are recognized in a way that they weren't when I tried this 2, 3 years ago. Like, I mean, I bring this up all the time, but I tried to put rondavel in Dali, I think it was 3 years ago, and it didn't know what a rondavel was, and I think it does now, right? So I guess that's progress. But I also worry that, like, how do you stop these things being extractive?
mm,
And one of the things, there's this really interesting uh, community in New Zealand who are they've created a language model of a Maori language, and
mm,
I listened to the guy talking about you know the the issues around, like, if you are create documenting and creating a large language model of an indigenous language, how are you making sure that that's not extractive? How are you not just taking all of that data and then, selling it to the highest bidder? How do you protect the language holders and the communities? And I just thought that that is such an interesting question. So yeah, I think all of those kind of ethical considerations around, data scraping, who owns the data to train these large language models. A lot of our artistic work is being scraped, right? And we're not being compensated for that or even given credit. And often we don't even know. So those are all, big issues for artists. And yet the tools are really fun to use and you can do amazing creative things with them. So it's constantly this sort of like tension for me. And then I think the last thing I just want to say on that is, and again, I'm saying this as someone who doesn't fully understand how these things are made, but the scale really worries me. Like, this bigger, faster, let's gobble, 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 which is mostly coming from Silicon Valley, I think is really dangerous. Like, I know it's a race, right? And it feels like a bit of a race to the bottom to me. I know it's a huge race. I know there's billions of money in it. Um, and I know right now, like, he who does it, and it's often he who does it bigger, will win. But I think it's incredibly damaging, and I think you break a lot of things when you do it like that. And I was really inspired by Pelanomi from Lalapa AI when she gave this, I think it was a TED talk or TEDx talk. And she just talked about, like, small, like, how can you make these models smaller and
mm.
and put care into them and make sure that, people are compensated, and that you know what you're doing and you know what you're scraping and it's all intentional. And I thought that was really inspiring.
And that's why I'm really excited about the work that Electric South is doing, because I think that advocacy is really important in this moment. And not enough of the advocacy is coming and being owned by artists beyond the conversation of ownership, which is just a small point of what is happening. And I guess that's exactly why we're working on tools like the toolkit, the upcoming principles and guidelines, which we hope to produce from the convening. We want to equip artists not just with funding or training, as we do in the lab, but with advocacy tools to shape policy and practice. In your view, what does it take to build ethical and inclusive AI in the immersive field, in immersive arts?
So I think this is and I feel like I keep saying this, but like, I do feel like this is where I look to experts, right? Because I think representation is a huge part of it. And I mean, that's why I'm also thrilled that you came on board to Electric South to run the research and policy work, because I think that you're right. Like, advocacy is a huge part of this, right? And often, because things are moving so fast, it can be hard. Like it's not an artist's job to know everything that's going on in the AI, space, right? They are making work, like, artists make work and often they'll explore a lot of this through their work, but like they are not going to be writing policy documents and going to government and saying we need this. I mean, some people will, right? Some people that's in their DNA. They're like advocates, activists, but not everyone wants to do that, nor should they have to. So that's why I'm really excited by the work that we're doing, and I think there are other academic institutions that are doing work around this, and other kind of cultural organizations in South Africa and elsewhere. So it's really important, right? Because we need to advocate for the needs of artists, and we also need to be learning as we go, right? Because we all have so much to learn in the space, and like we've just said, it changes constantly. Um, so I would say for me, and maybe I can just list some people that I look to in terms
Yes.
of like the sort of ethical. So I think that what Sam Gregory and his colleagues at Witness, like Shirin Anlin, are doing is fantastic around ethical uses of um, like photographs and video in service of human rights. And I mean, obviously, Witness is very much focused on human rights, but their toolkits are useful for anyone. And Sam is like really knowledgeable in this area. So, I mean, I would say look at any talks that Sam Gregory has given, go to Witness and download the toolkits and the resources that they have created because it's super, super useful. And I think in terms of synthetic media, right? So this is media that's created that, you could have um, Trump in a video and it's not actually Trump, but he's speaking. It looks like Trump, it sounds like Trump. How do we know whether it's Trump or not? A lot of the tools that are produced from Witness are really helpful for like sort of navigating synthetic media when it's okay to use it and when it's not okay to use it, right? They've actually had instances where there have been um, human rights campaigns that are using activists like in the streets who didn't actually exist, which is like incredibly problematic. So, I think that there are some really interesting things around like it's not necessarily bad to create synthetic media, but the context is everything. And I think that's also where actually just like digital literacy in general really falls short for a lot of people because we sort of still believe what we see. And right now, there's so much mis and disinformation. I like some of my other work that I do is around news organizations and trust in news. And it's hugely problematic. I mean, it's problematic already. And then when you've got video and photography that looks real and isn't, I mean, that is just like really like throwing dynamite into an already really explosive mix. So, or maybe a match. Maybe it's not the dynamite. The dynamite's already there and you're throwing a match in. Um, so I would say, yeah, I definitely think check out what Witness and Sam Gregory are doing on synthetic media, because I think that's just a good way for all of us to boost our digital literacy. I think what Timnit Gebru and I don't know if it's DARE or DAIR, but I think their work is really fascinating. I love how they are sort of uplifting the moderators who are often paid very badly and exploited all around the world, and actually having their voices in the conversation. So I think that, anything, I always read and listen to what Timnit is saying. Um, I think I hope I'm not pronouncing her name terribly, but Abeba Berhane is fantastic on like some of the kind of ethical considerations around how AI is talked about. She recently made some really interesting comments about a summit where almost everyone at the summit were from the big tech companies and the big AI companies, and there were very few activists or public sector folks or academics represented, right? So the whole conversation was skewed, and some stuff was actually censored as a result. Her talk was censored. I think these conversations are so important for us to be looking at because, who's in the room, who's not in the room.
Mhm.
And that comes back to why we're doing what we're doing, right? Artists are often not in the room. And it's really important that we're in the room. And if, I would say, if you don't think that this, uh, if you don't think that this is about you, then you really need to look a little deeper into like what's actually happening because all of us are implicated in this. Whether your work is being scraped, whether your image is being misrepresented online, whether you're being scammed. I mean, it's not, it's both in your personal life and your professional life. this is about you and it involves all of us. So I think we do need to kind of really pay attention.
That is so important. And I think it drills down why we increasingly need African artists, which may seem niche in this conversation, but we increasingly need them in global debates around AI. What do you think makes the perspective of the artist, or at least in our case, immersive artists, artists working in tech-based creative industries, what do you think is urgently needed, I guess, from their perspective?
Well, I think the first thing, and maybe this is just because I'm biased because I've just read it, is like new imaginations. And I actually feel like this is why Electric South, before we were thinking about AI, why we created Electric South, because the imaginations around what is possible with these new technologies felt so restricted because there was like this sense of like, well, the headsets aren't even available in Africa, so whatever. Like, we don't care. And it meant that the imaginations were so of the future of like what could be possible in the metaverse, what could be possible in these extended realities that were created. We're going through this very, very narrow lens, right? So it felt really limited. So the future felt limited as a result. And I've just been reading Ruha Benjamin's New Imaginations. And like for me, that is kind of what this is about. Like we need new imagination. So I know, I mean, and I feel it too, this feeling of sometimes it feels niche, but it's not because actually if if like the immersive sector, kind of the nascent immersive sector coming out of all countries in Africa, and I know there's more hubs where there's more activity, but like a lot of countries are exploring this work in different ways. If this work is not part of how we imagine the future, then the future is going to look like these weird sort of, Silicon Valley dystopic, you know, it's like there's, I mean, there's this look, you can imagine it when you close your eyes. It's like look of what the future will be, and it's so narrow. And so I think that's where I feel like this is really valuable. And so even if, you're not using AI tools in your virtual reality creations or your projection mapping, I still feel like it's all about this thing of like, how are we imagining the future? Um, and increasingly people are using AI tools. I mean, that's just, the AI, because of because it is just a tool, right? And I suppose that's another thing we should talk about. Artificial intelligence isn't one thing, it's a field of study, essentially. And within it, there are all these tools that people are creating. And generative AI is the thing we're focusing on right now. Because it's really obviously relevant to artists, but there are all these other kinds of AI within the field of artificial intelligence. And I think all of the tools are going to, even if you're not using them now, you're probably going to be using them in the next year or two because they are tools that you can do many different things with. They're very, very, um, uh, what's the word? Like they're very helpful for doing lots of different things and very unhelpful for some other things, by the way. But I do think one thing I'm slightly resisting is, I've heard a lot of people refer to ChatGPT as like fancy autocorrect. And I kind of feel like that is missing the point a little bit. Like refusing to see the power in these tools does not make them go away. And ChatGPT can do many things really, really well. It can also do many things very, very badly, right? But it can be great to get a first draft out. It can be great for uh I find it really helpful to think things through. But I would not write an essay. I mean, like, okay, I'll tell you something that makes me really sad. This is a little bit um off the track, but I think it is relevant. When I read all these stories of these professors who are really upset because people are just handing in unedited ChatGPT written essays, I kind of just feel really sad because it just feels like everyone's missing the point. Like if you go to university and you think that going to university is about just handing in essays, then what are you doing at university? And and if the teachers are frustrated, then why are they not teaching differently? Like the whole thing just feels, it's not AI's fault. Like there's a problem in the whole way that students and educators are working together. As many professors have said, like they don't ask students to write essays because they really want to read 20-year-olds' essays. Like they really don't. It's a way to teach you to think. And if you use ChatGPT to write that essay, you're not going to learn to think. So that is a very long way of saying I think these tools are really useful for some things, but really bad for other things. And if you are forgetting how to think, then I think that is going to be very damaging for all of us. But I don't think that's on the students. It's on like the whole education system. So I think that's just coming that's coming back around to the idea of like we all have to think more holistically, right? About like how are we using these tools? What are the expectations? Are they making, if they are making us lazy, what do we do about that, right? And another thing that makes me really depressed is the fact that the internet is eating itself. And so now you just have this internet slop because the AI is feeding, I call it like the Ouroboros of like cuck, because basically, it's like bad information flowing into bad information and getting worse and worse and worse. And it just flows round and round and round and eats itself. And you end up with this, like all these websites that are just absolute nonsense. And that is really sad to me because I am old enough that I kind of came up with the internet. Like I went to university when the World Wide Web was only just available. Like I had to do these questionnaires about like, do you know what the World Wide Web is? And it was so exciting. And then I was part of all these like weird user groups and like all these weird chat rooms. Like it was so fun and open. And now you see all this slop and it's like, oh God, really? Is this what we want collectively? Anyway, sorry, I've gone off track again, but yeah.
No, actually, it's I think this is just for context for the audience, the convening that's coming up is its second edition. So we held an inaugural convening last year on AI and immersive media. And I think one of the important perspectives, I think what lit up the room at the time, was the idea that artists are important in this conversation because artists help society imagine the use cases for new technology. And right now, we're seeing that the students just handing in because the use case has really been defined by, I guess, the tech industry, who's just, this is what we've created, and this is the immediate use of it. But we
Yeah.
haven't seen artists really on a large scale, and this is not to say, I mean, we know that there's a lot of work being done, um, but we haven't seen artists adopt it into their practices and therefore define the use case of the tool. There's been an almost arrested development around it. And I remember that one of the really key points that came out at the convening was that artists have always been at the forefront of imagining what new technology looks like. Before we went on the moon, artists imagined what it would look like to go into space. Before the internet came about, we imagined what this like knowing all of the information in the world would look like. And AI has come out, and these use cases have been largely defined outside of artists who really normally connect society with the tech. And I guess that brings us directly to a question we often get from artists, but what happens if we don't act now? What are the risks from your perspective of silence or absence?
I think they're huge, and that this is why I mentioned earlier the New Imaginations book by Ruha Benjamin because I think the risks are massive. And there's another TED talk that I really recommend. I watch it kind of every 6 months just to kind of remind myself because it's so connected to this conversation we're having right now. It's by Angela Oguntala, Oguntala, and it's about sort of reimagining the future. And she talks about the fact it's kind of like similar to what I was saying earlier about these narrow lenses. And if you don't have a wider, more global, more equal perspective on imaginings, that it's so dangerous for all of us, right? Because then everyone has a more a narrower, a sort of less robust, less open future. It closes it down for everyone, right? And it will, and by that I mean it's closing it down. In fact, I think this is actually something I think about all the time. When you see these sad billionaire bunker prepper, let's go to Mars because the Earth, like to me that is the I should probably use shorter words if I'm apotheosis of this conversation because that is where it leads you to, right? It's like get off Earth, close yourself away from humanity. People are dangerous. Like that is where this closed imagination is taking us. So it's vital that we have artists in these conversations. And I do think, and again, it's not relevant for everyone, but one of the, well, one of the ways I see that happening is both through practice and through technology. So, and they're kind of connected. So I think one is that, and um, I mentioned, I mean, and some of these are artists outside of Africa, but I think again, one of the things I love is the bridge building, right? Like,
Mm,
what can we learn from them? What can they learn from us? How are we building bridges and collaborating? So, what Karen Palmer and Violeta Ayala, for example, are exploring through their work, they're using AI to look at the risks of AI, but also to look
mm,
at the possibilities, right? So Karen is talking about surveillance capitalism essentially in her work, and exploring the dangers of it through work that uses AI. And Violeta Ayala is imagining these sort of indigenous possibilities through work using AI. So I think there are ways of contesting and pushing back against some of the restrictions of AI through practice. And then the other part of it is actually who's developing the technologies. And I mean, it for lots of reasons, a lot of those technologies come to us and we're not building them. But I mean, I think that can change. And I think those things are both really important together because, technology is important, right? It is part of how uh it's how we interface with the world. It's how we create with technology. So I think that I think that the reason I'm so passionate about this, and the reason I don't think this is niche is we are together building these new imaginations, and the only way to ensure that they are not a bunch of millionaires suffering on Mars is to actually open this up. And this is connected,
mm,
by the way, to so many things. It's connected to climate. It's connected to um our relationship with nature and how we think about plants, and it's everything, right? Because at the moment we're so disconnected from nature that a lot of these climate conversations almost feel like outside of us, but they are us. And I so that's why, all of these things to me are they're everything, because actually artists help us see the world differently, and through art we are able to reimagine the future. So this stuff is not, you know, I always say this, but like the arts are not a luxury. They're not a luxury. They are essential. Without them, I don't think we can think straight.
and essential in this conversation. I know you've mentioned a few, but are there any particular artist-led projects that you feel really show the power of inclusive AI with creative practice?
Well, I've mentioned a few people. I think what with Russell Hlongwane and the Low Def crew did with that piece that now I'm forgetting the name of Dazata. I think I don't know how you say it. I thought that was really beautiful. Um, there's people like Malik Afeg. Again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. Malik Afegbua in Nigeria. He's done these like visions of Nigerian elders. That really like took the internet by storm, and I think rightfully so. They were so beautiful. Um, I guess, one of the things that I really and I think this may also be a shortcoming of mine because I feel like I'm not as connected to the art, the global, the more kind of beyond extended reality. I'm not as connected to the digital arts community in Africa, right? Just because my work, I only have so many hours in the day, and I feel like I do have a bit of a narrow focus sometimes. One of the things I'm sad about is I don't know more about other artists in Africa who are using AI in interesting ways. And actually, that's something I was thinking would be wonderful to come out of this, both this webinar series and the convening you're doing, is actually to learn more. And it doesn't have to be obviously people who are only working in XR and immersive arts, right? But anyone who is using AI in interesting ways in Africa, it would be great to hear about them and hear what they're thinking about the tools, how they're using the tools, what's working for them, what's not working for them, what they're worried about. So that I think that's kind of my homework at the moment, is to learn more about what's happening here on the continent, because I feel like a lot of my examples are outside of Africa.
Mm,
And I'd love to change that. And again, I love the bridge building. It's like what I do. It's kind of in my DNA because I've lived in different places and I can't help it, right? I just always am like, who's doing this and who can we bring here? But I am hyper conscious of extractivism, right? Which is a
mm,
big problem here, and I don't want everything to feel like it's like, oh, all the people doing cool stuff are elsewhere and we need to learn from them. I don't think that's true. Like there's so much amazing stuff that is coming out, and I think it's like we're just maybe not seeing it. I'm maybe not seeing it.
I know that's definitely not the case because if I've learned anything from what comes out of the New Dimensions Lab, there is a lot happening out there that is really impressive. Looking ahead, what are your hopes then for the next stage of AI and immersive media in arts? And I guess if you want to speak wider to the digital arts, but yeah, what are your next hopes for the next stage, you know, in AI?
Well, I mean, so there's a couple of things. I think one thing I would love to see more local AI sort of companies, like local, I mean local as in both in South Africa and in the rest of Africa, like doing really interesting work with AI, creating like so both researchers doing, interesting AI research, but also creating tools. I know there's already a lot of really interesting stuff for local languages, but beyond that, like tools for arts. I think that would be really exciting. I'm one of the things I would love is I just have all these people like I mean I'm just going to mention some of them like Rachel Caldicott, who does a lot of responsible tech work and has done some really interesting stuff around AI recently in the UK. Sam Gregory, who I mentioned with Witness. I would love to have like a international kind of group gathering where we share, and it's not like, you know, it's like on an equal footing, but everyone's sort of bringing something, and we're like, because I feel like there isn't enough of that. Like that's something that I've kind of just been noodling on is like I know all of these amazing people, and I know that they often will meet at things in Amsterdam and New York and London, but like, wouldn't it be great if they could meet in Joburg or Nairobi and we all like kind of figure some of these things out together. So that yeah, that's one thing I'm thinking. And then yeah, I mean, the other stuff is just things like how do you compensate artists if their work is being scraped? Is there better ways of annotating, like making sure that the models are small enough so that we can actually track what we're scraping and acknowledge that. Um, I know there's like model cards, so that you can get information on the models. I just think there's a lot. Hugging Face actually, I think do a lot of really interesting work. I don't spend enough time on there because I just don't have enough time, but I have been really impressed with some of the stuff I've seen on Hugging Face. Um, and oh, and then the other thing is, I can't believe it's taken what 39 minutes, 40 minutes for me to mention this, but I'm also really worried about privacy and data. And, I think those things are massively important. And, if you don't think they're important, I highly recommend watching the talk that the woman who runs Signal, oh, what's her name? She gave this amazing talk at Meredith Whittaker uh, at South by Southwest. She gave this amazing talk why she explained why privacy is important to you, even if you don't think it is. And her example was context. Again, it's always about context. Like if you are in a doctor's office, you can talk about your fungal infection. If you are in your workplace, you don't want everyone talking about your fungal infection, right? Context is everything. So privacy is important to everyone. It's just that, you need to control what you have where. And I think that that is something that we are really in danger of losing because so many people are like, I've got nothing to hide. And it's like, you don't need to have like state secrets to hide to be worried about privacy. It's really, and I think in all of this, privacy, data, how your data is used and collected, these things are massively important. I mean, and talk about extractivism, right? And then I don't know enough about this, but I am really worried about the data centers and the water usage. And look, I think there's a lot of things. I've read a few people saying, you know, of all the things to worry about with AI, actually the climate thing is not the key thing, but it is a thing, right? It's using water, it's using electricity. These data centers are being built. So I think that's a worry, right? Because often they're not going to be built next to the millionaires' homes. So often it's like, they're being built in places where people don't have much of a choice. Oh, and then yeah, and that also goes back to there's a lot of humans behind AI, and like anything, things flow downstream, and all the moderators and all the people doing the most awful jobs are often in countries where they're being paid a minimum wage or less to do horrible traumatic work. And I think that is still happening. And that is
Mhm.
obviously a problem. So for me, it's like there's all these levels. And again, artists don't need to think about all of this stuff all the time, but it is part of the ecosystem of using AI, right? And I guess and especially you, Adra, because you're doing the policy work, we do need to be thinking about all of this stuff and how it affects both the artists and the ecosystem that we work
Mhm.
within.
So, so, so true. And that is the work and that is the mandate. And excited to be executing it. I think
It's a big job.
conversations like it's a big job, and I think conversations like this are just the start. Well, thank you, Ingrid, for those insights. We'll now take questions from the audience. Please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Looking at our first question from Cameron. I own a creative agency and would like your take on what role do you think storytelling and culture plays in shaping the way AI tools are built and adopted?
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, I think I think storytelling is a huge part of I mean, even something like ChatGPT, like the I mean, look, I have massive issues with what OpenAI are doing because they are, when I say bigger, stronger, faster, gobble, 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 I feel like that's a great example of that. But the stories, the way that they tell the story of what they're doing is powerful, right? It's
Mhm.
like if you listen to oh God, I'm going completely blank. What's the name of the guy? Uh Sam Altman, sorry, gosh. If you listen to Sam Altman talk, it's incredibly uh uh evocative, and like, I mean, he's really like, it's a powerful picture of what AI can do for society and the planet, and he tells this great story. um and and I think also you can I was just talking before this webinar, Ari Kushner, who works with an agency called Missing Pieces. I mean, I think it's his agency. He's been doing some amazing experiments, and I would highly recommend you follow his Instagram um, or his other social media. But like he has been doing some stuff about Trump that is brilliant. I think really brilliant, clever, funny, provocative. Um, yeah. So I mean, there are you can tell amazing stories with AI, and you can tell amazing stories about AI. I think it's really I mean, storytelling is always part of, like, you can't get people to adopt tools without telling good stories, right? I mean, it's storytelling is PR, storytelling is how we learn
Mhm.
about things, storytelling is how we engage with things. So it's preeminent. And then obviously you've now got these tools where you can tell stories very quickly, right? You can put together a video. Um, I guess actually this is a good time just to quickly mention, because I feel bad that I haven't mentioned this. It it's obviously really worrying for a lot of people that their jobs are going to go away because, if you can just create an animation, or just, do something without a cinematographer, or make something look different without a grader, or make a film without a director or a writer, right? What are all those people going to be doing? And I am worried about that. I think some jobs are going to go away. But I also think that we are going to, we don't know yet exactly how that's going to play out. And I think a couple of things. One is, not with some jobs, it will not be the job that goes away, but some tasks within that job will go away and the job itself will change. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, I think handmade products, handmade work will
Mhm.
feel very different, and people will really want that work. And now that might be a niche industry, but I do feel like there's going to be a real yearning for stuff that has no AI anywhere near it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so I think the marketplace will change. The kind of flow in the creative economy will change. But I am worried, and I if I think it's I don't dismiss people who say they're worried about their jobs. I think it is a worry. Um, and beyond the jobs, I think it is also a worry that the craft, there is a
Mm,
craft to producing things that take time and labor and thought and process. And one of the things that I find very um unfulfilling about AI is it's all about product, it's not about process, right? The process is erased, it's like obfuscated because the process is like you do a prompt and boom, here's your thing. The process for me is so much a part of why I love this
mm.
community. It's why I love Electric South. It's why I love the labs. It's all about process, right? And so what I'm thinking about is funders have always been very interested in products. And I know in the last few years there's been more focus on process. And I'm just wondering, like, in terms of how we fund the arts, how can we start to fund process and not just think about product? And I think
Yes.
that could be a way to actually move away from this, like AI can produce things so quickly. Who cares? We're doing process, right? So I think we might need to change our the way we think about like how things are produced and what gets funded and what gets acknowledged, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I've got another question from Meterick. How do we balance innovation in AI with protecting cultural authenticity in immersive projects?
Ah, hi, Meterick. Wait, say the question one more time.
How do we balance innovation in AI with protecting cultural authenticity in immersive projects?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to my very long-winded answer that I just gave, though. I think a lot of it is about process and then maybe about relationship. So, um, I think with sort of cultural work and heritage work, like we're doing this big project right now, with IFAS in South Africa around archives, and then there's going to be immersive practitioners working with the archives. And we're already learning that there's like so much just in the relationships. We're early on in the process, but I think it is about process and relationships. So, like, there are still humans in these. For now, there are still humans like in these processes, right? And so I think a lot of it is about how you negotiate the relationship. So whether that be with other people or whether that be with heritage or archives, right? Which maybe the people are no longer alive, but you are still dealing with artifacts and cultural memory and indigenous protocols and things like that. And you've got to, I think, acknowledge that. So, and that's a relationship too, right? Even if it's with archival knowledge and not living people. So I think it's all about relationship and process. And the thing I just keep coming back to is it's about slowness. It can't, this whole like
Mm,
everything's got to be done fast. I just think we've got to find time to slow down and
mm,
acknowledge relationships and process. And that's why I keep coming back to funding and money because you can't do that unless you have the money to do it slowly, right? If everyone's expecting everything to be fast and like, oh, just chuck some prompts in there and get back to us on Tuesday, no one's going to be funding the relationships and the process. So this is kind of on the funders, and I'm saying this as a sort of half funder, half trying to get funder. um, I think we've got to really think about like how we finance this. How do we support artists who want to work differently and don't just want to chuck some prompts in there? And I'm not again, it's like again going back to the tension. There's nothing wrong with some great prompts. There's nothing
mm.
wrong with using AI, but it can't all be that because it's just flat. It's like
Yes.
there's no I can't explain it right.
Craft.
There's
It's
no
the
drift, there's
craft.
no
It's the
craft, there's
craft.
no
Yes.
I want some blood, sweat, and tears in my art sometimes.
I absolutely get it. Question from Michelle Naidu. What risks do you see if artists, storytellers, and cultural workers aren't part of AI design processes? So I think we're touching on it already.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we've touched on it a little bit with the sort of failure of imagination stuff. And I think there was this project that I was involved with. Kamal Sinclair wrote this amazing piece of research called Making a New Reality, like a long time ago now, like maybe 2016. And it was all about like the blind spots that we all have, right? So if you're an engineer, you have blind spots. If you're a researcher, you have blind spots. If you're a white woman in South Africa, you definitely have blind spots, you know. So it's like you have to acknowledge your blind spots. And one of the things that she talks a lot about is like, you know, what happens when you have artists in a space that's mostly engineers, and how does that get the engineers to see things differently?
Mm,
Um, and I would say this is exactly why we need artists in this space. I think if you are to have, for example, a government, and I'm sure there's been lots of these without artists in the room, you have a government meeting about AI, right? And you've got lots of like the public sector in there. You've got you know, you've got all these organizations, but you don't have any artists. Who is actually going to say, you know, actually, by the way, this is important to me, or have you thought about this? So I think it's really vital. And it's not just for policy, it's for everything, right? It's about everything. So I think it's really, really vital. And I do also think that one of the reasons, and it's not the only reason, I mean, art does many things. But one of the things that I think artists are good at is like this, they see the world sideways, like they don't look at everything head on, right? It's why great art can like, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, I never thought about that before.
mm,
And I think too much of the AI discussion is head on. Like, and so we need some of those like sideways, like weird interventions that make us think, oh, wow, I never thought of that before. And I think that's why we need artists in the room. And then it's got to be artists from everywhere, because if it's only American artists or only British artists, like it's still going to be skewed because we all have blind spots. It's not a
mm.
problem to have blind spots. Everyone has blind spots. But you've got to mitigate for that.
So profound. Um, I've got a question from Zach Kisia from Kenya. Um, how can AI and immersive arts bet better represent African cultures despite Western bias and data sets? It's almost like the questions are anticipating
No,
a
such a good question.
conversation.
Um, well, I think I think that's a group effort. So I think that
Mm,
is artists exploring through AI, like exploring these topics through AI, you know, so like exploring African stories, exploring African heritage, exploring you know, whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be too limited. I think another problem often when you talk about storytelling in Africa is everything gets like squished through a, you know, a weird funnel. Is like it all has to be like this sort of like African thing that is almost extractive again, because it's like, you know, there's a broad spectrum, right? We are 54 countries, like so much, so many stories. So I think part of it is like creating work. But I think the other part of it is it's a collective effort. It's all these amazing African language organizations now, like I mentioned before, like Lalapa AI and Masakane, and you know, the fact that there are more of these African languages in large language models means that, you know, more people can explore in their local languages. I think that's super exciting. Um, I would imagine, I mean, I haven't done enough exploration, but I would imagine if there's more input into the image and video systems, then those video and image systems will be more global and more representative. I have a hunch right now they probably aren't enough,
mm.
again, because of bias and blind spots. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's like artists need to art, technologists need to tech, you know, policymakers need to policy make, and you know, collectively we move this forward. Yeah, I don't think there's another way. There's no other way through but through,
And that's why we convene.
and that's why
Um,
we convene. Yeah, we love to
and
convene.
just to make a correction, that the question previously attributed to Metarik was actually from ZK Animation Studios, but and that was a question around authenticity. But this is the question from Metarik. What are your thoughts on using AI for storytelling visuals and how close that crosses over to blurring the truth lines of what is perceived as real? Should we be watermarking AI content?
Yeah, oh, this is like such a big. I mean, going back to I think some of the conversations Sam Gregory has had around this are really useful. And I think it again, it sort of depends on context. I mean, I hate to sound this because it sounds like I'm hedging my bets, but I think it does. For example, I think I mean, then there, by the way, there are some really interesting, like the archive, there's an archive guideline for using archives in documentary films, for example, like a best practices guideline that's been created.
Hmm.
I think it depends on what you're doing, right? So if you are Ari Kushner and you're making a sort of a surreal, a satirical piece on Instagram about Trump, um, I feel like that's one thing. If you're making a documentary and you are putting a Trump video in there that is not actually Trump and you haven't watermarked it, I think that's dishonest. But I'm just thinking back to um, my documentary days, we had a lot of reconstructions, and you didn't always have to say reconstruction because the documentary sets it out at the beginning that there are going to be reconstructions, and it's really obvious what are the reconstructions and what aren't. And by the way, this is an ongoing thing in documentaries. There are a lot of documentaries that are creatively blurring the lines in a way that make people really nervous. And there's been a lot of pushback, right? So AI is not the only reason why we're having this conversation. For as long as there's been video and photography, we've been having like the what's real, what's not real. The tools are changing and the tools are much, much more convincing, which is a worry. So I think it depends on context. I think sometimes they should be watermarked, absolutely. Um, I do think, for example, in the news work that I do, the conversation's a little bit different because it's really important when you are presenting, especially now when there's such a lack of trust in news and there's so much rubbish out there. It's really important that people know what they're looking at. And I think also in the human rights context, you can't be passing off something as happening if it didn't happen. But in a creative documentary, I think that there are some really amazing use cases for using AI. And I think it depends on the context how you explain what is AI and what is not. My rule is always it's a contract between you and the audience. And if the
Mhm.
audience understands, if most people in the audience understand what it is that you're doing, then it's okay. And if you are pulling the wool over their eyes, it's dishonest and you shouldn't do it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today, and especially to you, Ingrid, for sharing such thoughtful reflections and provocations. At Electric South, we see this series and the convening as the start of a much longer journey to ensure Africa's artists are not just consumers of AI technologies, but leaders in shaping how they're designed, governed, and used in creative practice. This session with Ingrid is part of our three-part Electric Africa webinar series ahead of our invite-only AI and immersive media convening in Johannesburg in September. Next week, we'll be joined on 3rd of September by Sandra Rodriguez to discuss governing imagination, ethics, power, and artist agency in AI. And on the 10th of September, we'll hear from filmmaker Brett Gaylor on AI and artists in practice. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow Electric South on social media to stay updated. Thank you again, Ingrid. I'm Ajwa Nkoma, and it's been a pleasure to host you today. See you all next week.